What happens when the most feared heavyweight champion in history underestimates a simple man from Philadelphia? When Mike Tyson called Rocky Balboa just a simple underdog, he had no idea he was about to learn the hardest lesson of his career. This isn't just about boxing, it's about respect, humility, and why sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest truths. Comment below. Have you ever been underestimated? Drop A if you believe in the power of the underdog. And stick around until the end, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about true strength. He thought he had already won the fight before it even started. Mike Tyson, the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, stood in the center of the press conference room like a king holding court. His massive frame cast shadows across the assembled reporters, cameras flashing like lightning strikes, illuminating his intimidating presence. The black tank top stretched tight across his sculpted chest, every muscle a testament to years of brutal training and devastating victories. His voice, that distinctive lisp that somehow made his threats even more menacing, cut through the air like a blade through silk. Rocky Balboa? Tyson's laugh was short, sharp, predatory. You people are joking, right? This is supposed to be a fight? He leaned forward, his dark eyes scanning the crowd of journalists like a predator selecting prey. I've studied every fighter worth studying. I've broken men who were supposed to be legends. Ali, Frazier, Foreman, they were warriors. But this Rocky character? He shook his head, almost pitying. He's just a simple underdog who got lucky a few times. The room buzzed with nervous energy. Reporters scribbled frantically, knowing they were witnessing something that would either be prophetic or catastrophically wrong. Tyson's trainer, Cus D'Amato's teachings echoing in his movements, paced behind him like a caged animal. See, what you people don't understand, Tyson continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, forcing everyone to lean in, is that boxing isn't just about heart, it's about skill, it's about speed, it's about power that can end a man's career with one punch. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor, with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. Rocky Balboa fights with his emotions. He fights with his heart. Noble, sure, inspiring, maybe for the movies, but in the real ring, against real power, against real technique. Tyson's smile was cold, calculated. Heart doesn't protect you from getting your head taken off. The press conference continued, but the damage was done. Those words, just a simple underdog, would be replayed on every sports channel, printed in every newspaper, shared across every social media platform. Tyson had drawn his line in the sand, and on the other side stood a man from Philadelphia who had heard it all before. In the back of the room, a lone figure in a worn leather jacket observed silently. Mickey Goldmill, Rocky's trainer, said nothing. His weathered hands gripped his walking stick a little tighter. His eyes, sharp despite his age, watched Tyson with the patience of a man who had seen real fighters and knew the difference between strength and character. He turned and walked away without a word, but those who knew him recognized the look on his face. It was the same expression he wore before Rocky fought Apollo Creed the first time. The quiet confidence of a man who knew something the world was about to learn the hard way. The news spread through Philadelphia like wildfire, through dry leaves. In every barbershop, every diner, every street corner, where working-class people gathered to discuss dreams and disappointments, Mike Tyson's words echoed, just a simple underdog. The phrase stung because it carried the weight of truth. Rocky Balboa was simple. He wasn't sophisticated. He didn't have a college education or speak in polished sentences. He was a man who spelled out his thoughts slowly and sometimes struggled to find the right words. But in the meat-packing plant where Rocky had once worked, among the dock workers and construction crews who had watched him rise from nothing, those words landed differently. They understood what Tyson apparently didn't, that being simple wasn't the same as being weak. Being an underdog wasn't a limitation, it was a superpower that the privileged and the powerful could never comprehend. Rocky himself heard about the comments while sitting in his small apartment, Adrian beside him on their old couch. The television replayed Tyson's press conference, and with each repetition, the words seemed to grow heavier. Just a simple underdog. Adrian reached over and turned off the television, her gentle hands finding his. "Rock," she said softly, "you don't have to prove anything to him." "D." But Rocky was already somewhere else, his mind traveling back to every fight, every moment when people had counted him out. The meat locker where he trained with sides of beef because he couldn't afford proper equipment. The first fight with Apollo when he was supposed to be a mere exhibition, a tune-up fight for the champion. The brutal battles with Clubber Lang when everyone said he was too old, too soft, too far removed from the hungry fighter he once was. He stood up slowly, walked to the window, and looked out at the Philadelphia skyline. The city stretched before him like a battlefield he had already conquered, not with violence, but with persistence, with heart, with the simple truth that sometimes the most powerful force in the world is a man who refuses to stay down. Meanwhile, across the country in Las Vegas, Mike Tyson was in his training camp, destroying heavy bags with combinations that sounded like gunshots. His sparring partners wore extra protection because even in practice, Tyson's punches carried the potential for serious injury. His training sessions were legendary, faster, stronger, more intense than anyone in the sport. He moved like a force of nature, each punch thrown with the precision of a surgeon and the power of a wrecking ball. But there was something different in his training now, an edge, an irritation that his usual dominance couldn't seem to satisfy. His promoters and managers fed his ego, assuring him that Rocky Balboa would be the easiest fight of his career. They showed him footage of Rocky's previous fights, pointing out every flaw, every moment of vulnerability, every time the Philadelphia fighter had been knocked down or hurt. What they didn't show him, what they didn't understand themselves, was that Rocky's greatest strength had never been avoiding getting knocked down. It was what he did after hitting the canvas. It was the way he stood up, shook off the pain, and kept moving forward. It was something that couldn't be measured in speed or power or technical ability. It was something that lived in the soul of a man who had been underestimated his entire life. The transformation began in the quiet hours before dawn. While Mike Tyson slept in his luxury training facility, surrounded by state-of-the-art equipment and an army of specialists, Rocky Balboa was already running through the streets of Philadelphia. His footsteps echoed off empty storefronts and silent apartments, a rhythmic heartbeat that seemed to pulse through the very veins of the city. But this wasn't the same Rocky who had stumbled through his early career. There was something different in his stride now, something that Mickey noticed immediately when the old trainer arrived at the gym to find his fighter already 3 hours into his workout. The heavy bags swayed under combinations that were more precise than they had ever been, more purposeful. Rocky had always fought with his heart, but now there was calculation behind the emotion, strategy beneath the passion. "What's different about this one, Rock?" Mickey asked, settling onto his usual stool in the corner of the gym. The morning light filtered through dirty windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floors. Rocky paused, his hands still wrapped, sweat already soaking through his grey training shirt. "He don't know me, Mick," he said quietly. He looked at me and saw what he wanted to see. A simple guy, an underdog. He turned to face his trainer, and Mickey saw something in those eyes that made him sit up straighter. "But he don't know that being simple ain't the same as being stupid, and being an underdog don't mean you can't bite." The training that followed was unlike anything Philadelphia had ever seen. Rocky's usual routine of meat locker workouts and street runs expanded into something more comprehensive. He studied film, not just of his own fights, but of Tyson's. He watched the way the champion moved, the patterns in his combinations, the subtle tells that preceded his most devastating attacks. For the first time in his career, Rocky Balboa was preparing not just with his heart and his fists, But with his mind, Adrian watched this transformation with a mixture of pride and concern. She saw her husband becoming something harder, more focused, but she worried about the cost. One evening, as Rocky sat at their kitchen table watching fight footage for the 4th hour straight, she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You're different," she said simply. Rocky looked up at her, his eyes soft for the first time all day. "I gotta be, Adrian. This ain't Apollo or Clubber. This is something else. This is a guy who thinks he knows what I am before we even step in the ring." Meanwhile, the media circus was building to a fever pitch. Sports commentators debated endlessly about whether Rocky even belonged in the same ring as Tyson. The betting odds were so heavily in Tyson's favor that many casinos stopped taking bets altogether. Talk show hosts made jokes about the mismatch of the century. Magazine covers showed split images of the two fighters with headlines like "Beauty and the Beast" and "David versus Goliath." But in the barbershops and corner stores of Philadelphia, a different conversation was taking place. Old-timers who had watched Rocky's entire career weren't so sure. They remembered the first Apollo fight, when Rocky was supposed to be a sacrificial lamb. They remembered Clubber Lang, when everyone said Rocky was finished. They remembered Ivan Drago, when Rocky carried the weight of an entire country's grief and somehow found a way to win. "You can't measure heart," said one old man in a South Philly diner. "You can't put it on a scale or time it with a stopwatch. But when push comes to shove, when everything else falls away, heart is what's left standing." The press conferences leading up to the fight became a study in contrasts. Mike Tyson arrived in custom suits, flanked by an entourage that moved like a small army. His words were sharp, calculated, designed to intimidate and dominate. He spoke about Rocky with the casual dismissiveness of a man swatting a fly. Annoying, perhaps, but ultimately insignificant. "I've knocked out men who were twice the fighter Rocky Balboa will ever be," Tyson declared at one particularly heated press conference. "I've ended careers with single punches. I've made grown men afraid to enter the ring." He leaned into the microphone, his voice dropping to that menacing whisper that had become his trademark. "What's Rocky Balboa going to do? Out-heart me? Inspire me to death?" The crowd of reporters laughed, some nervously, others with genuine amusement. Tyson fed off their energy, his confidence growing with each chuckle. "See, that's the problem with stories like Rocky's. People confuse movies with reality. They think because he got lucky a few times, because he had some dramatic comebacks, that means something against real power, against real skill." When it was Rocky's turn to speak, the difference was immediately apparent. He sat quietly at the table, his hands folded, looking like a man who had wandered into the wrong room by mistake. His suit was clean but clearly not expensive. His hair was neatly combed but not styled. When he spoke, it was without the theatrical flair that had become expected in the world of boxing promotion. "Mike's a great fighter," Rocky said simply. "Probably one of the best ever. He's got speed, he's got power, he's got technique. I respect that." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "But respect goes both ways. And maybe he don't know as much about me as he thinks he does." The room was quiet, no dramatic declarations, no threats or boasts, just a simple statement that somehow carried more weight than all of Tyson's bluster. One reporter pressed him about Tyson's comments about being called just a simple underdog. Rocky looked up, and for just a moment there was something in his eyes that made the room hold its breath. "Simple ain't stupid," he said quietly. "And sometimes the guy you don't take serious is the one who surprises you." Behind the scenes, the two training camps couldn't have been more different. Tyson's was a military operation. Nutritionists, sports psychologists, sparring partners flown in from around the world, every detail managed and optimized. His daily routine was precise to the minute, his diet calculated to the gram, his workouts monitored by computers and specialists. Rocky's camp was Mickey, Adrian and Paulie in a Philadelphia gym that had seen better decades. But what it lacked in sophistication, it made up for in something harder to quantify. There was a rhythm to it, a natural flow that came from years of working together, of understanding each other without need for words. "You know what I think?" Paulie said one afternoon, watching Rocky work the speed bag. "I think this Tyson guy's got it backwards. He thinks being simple makes you weak, but being simple means you know who you are. Means you don't got all that other stuff getting in the way when it comes time to fight." Mickey nodded slowly. He had seen fighters like Tyson before, supremely talented, physically gifted, but sometimes too confident in their abilities to see the dangers that came from unexpected places. "The thing about guys like Tyson," the old trainer said, "is they prepare for the fighter they expect to face. But what if that ain't the fighter who shows up?" 3 weeks before the fight, something shifted in Mike Tyson's camp. It was subtle at first. A hesitation in his voice during interviews, a slightly less relaxed demeanor during training sessions. His sparring partners noticed it first. Where Tyson had once been playful, almost casual in his dominance, there was now an intensity that bordered on desperation. He was hitting harder than necessary, training longer than his schedule demanded, pushing himself with a ferocity that suggested doubt rather than confidence. The change came after Tyson's team showed him more footage of Rocky's fights. Not the highlight reels they had been studying, but the full battles, the 15-round war with Apollo Creed, the brutal comeback against Clubber Lang, the impossible victory over Ivan Drago in Russia. Watching these fights in their entirety painted a different picture than the carefully selected clips they had been analyzing. "How many times does he get knocked down in the Drago fight?" Tyson asked his trainer after watching Rocky absorb punishment that would have ended most careers. "4 times, came the reply, but he got up every time." "And against Lang?" "Knocked down in the first round, got up and won by knockout." Tyson stared at the screen, watching Rocky take punches that should have left him unconscious, should have sent him home to Philadelphia a broken man. But instead he kept fighting, kept moving forward, kept finding ways to win when winning seemed impossible. For the first time since the fight was announced, Mike Tyson began to understand that he might be facing something he had never encountered before. Not a better fighter necessarily, but a different kind of fighter. A man who didn't fight according to the rules of logic or self-preservation. Meanwhile, in Philadelphia, Rocky was discovering parts of himself that had been dormant for years. The hunger that had driven him in his early career was returning, but refined now by experience and sharpened by purpose. He wasn't fighting for a title or money or fame. He was fighting for something more fundamental. He was fighting for the respect of a man who had dismissed him without truly seeing him. "You know what the difference is between me and him?" Rocky asked Adrian one evening as they walked through their old neighborhood. "He fights because he's supposed to win. I fight because I ain't supposed to lose." Adrian squeezed his hand, understanding the distinction even if others might not. There was something pure about fighting from a position of being underestimated, something that stripped away everything except the essential core of who you were. The media attention was reaching a crescendo. ESPN ran special features comparing the two fighters' styles, their backgrounds, their paths to this moment. The consensus was unanimous. Mike Tyson would win, probably early, probably decisively. Rocky Balboa was a relic of a different era, a feel-good story that was about to meet the harsh reality of modern boxing. But in the small gyms and neighborhood bars, where boxing was more than entertainment, where it was a way of life and a measure of character, the conversation was different. Old fighters who had been counted out themselves, trainers who had worked with men who found ways to win when winning seemed impossible. They weren't so sure. "There's something about guys like Rocky," said one former heavyweight contender. "They don't fight the way they're supposed to. They don't follow the rules. And sometimes, when you're not following the rules, you find ways to do things that shouldn't be possible." The final week before the fight brought an unexpected visitor to Rocky's gym. Apollo Creed, the former heavyweight champion who had given Rocky his first shot at greatness, walked through the doors like a ghost from boxing's golden age. His presence immediately changed the atmosphere. Conversations stopped, training routines paused, everyone understanding they were in the presence of greatness. "Mind if an old champion watches?" Apollo asked, settling onto Mickey's stool with the easy grace that had defined his career. Rocky stopped his workout, sweat streaming down his face, and extended his hand to his former rival-turned-friend. "Apollo, what brings you to Philly?" "Heard you were fighting someone who thinks he knows what you're about," Apollo replied, his voice carrying that familiar mix of humor and wisdom. "Thought maybe you could use some perspective from someone who made the same mistake once." They talked for hours after the gym cleared out. Apollo shared his memories of their first fight, how he had entered the ring expecting an easy victory over a local fighter who was supposed to be little more than an exhibition opponent. How Rocky's simple, relentless style had caught him completely off guard. How it had taken everything he had just to survive 15 rounds with a man everyone had dismissed. "The thing about underestimating someone like you," Apollo said, "is that by the time you realize your mistake, you're already in trouble. Tyson's got all the tools, speed, power, technique, but tools are only as good as the man using them. And if that man doesn't really understand what he's up against..." Apollo left the next morning, but not before offering one final piece of advice. "Don't try to be something you're not, Rock. Don't try to out-technique him or out-power him. Be exactly who you are, because who you are is something he's never faced before." Across the country, Mike Tyson was dealing with his own demons. The confidence that had carried him through his career was being tested by something he couldn't punch his way through: doubt. His sleep was restless, filled with dreams of fighting an opponent who wouldn't stay down, who kept coming forward no matter how hard he was hit. His team noticed the change and tried to address it with more training, more preparation, more analysis of Rocky's weaknesses. But what they couldn't address was the growing realization that they might have fundamentally misunderstood their opponent. The man they had dismissed as just a simple underdog was beginning to look like something else entirely, a fighter who operated by different rules, who drew strength from places that couldn't be measured or quantified. "Maybe we should watch more tape," suggested one of Tyson's advisors. "No," Tyson replied, staring out the window of his hotel room at the Las Vegas lights. "I've seen enough. The problem isn't what I don't know about him. The problem is what I think I know." The final press conference was a study in contrasts. Tyson arrived looking every inch the champion, perfectly groomed, expensively dressed, radiating the kind of confidence that had intimidated opponents for years. But those who knew him well could see the subtle signs of stress, the slightly clenched jaw, the way his eyes searched the room, the controlled energy that suggested a man holding something back. Rocky looked exactly the same as he had at every other press conference, simple, honest, unadorned by the theatrical elements that had come to define modern boxing promotion. When asked about his chances against the heavily favored Tyson, his answer was characteristically straightforward. "I don't know if I'm going to win," he said quietly, "but I know I'm going to try, and I know that trying ain't always about being the best or the fastest or the strongest. Sometimes it's about being willing to keep going when everyone else thinks you should quit." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of his words settling over the assembled crowd like dust after an explosion. Then the questions resumed, but something had changed. The fight was no longer just about a champion defending his title against an overmatched challenger. It had become something deeper, more fundamental. A test of what really mattered when two men stepped into a ring with nothing but their courage and their will. Fight night arrived with the electricity that only comes with truly historic sporting events. Las Vegas was transformed into a boxing mecca, with thousands of fans streaming into the city from around the world. The atmosphere was carnival-like, but beneath the celebration was an undercurrent of anticipation that bordered on the supernatural. This wasn't just another fight. It was a collision between two different philosophies of what it meant to be a fighter. In his dressing room, Mike Tyson went through his pre-fight ritual with mechanical precision. His hands were wrapped with the same care that had been taken for hundreds of fights before this one. His body was loose, his muscles warm, his technique sharp. Everything that could be controlled had been controlled. Every variable that could be managed had been managed. But there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there in previous fights. A flicker of uncertainty that his team pretended not to notice. "Remember," his trainer said as they went through final preparations, "he's going to try to make this ugly. He's going to try to turn it into a brawl. Stay technical. Stay sharp. Use your speed and power, and this will be over early." Tyson nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about the footage he had watched, about the way Rocky had absorbed punishment and kept coming forward. He was thinking about Apollo Creed's warnings, about underestimating the Philadelphia fighter. Most of all, he was thinking about his own words from that first press conference, just a simple underdog, and wondering if he had written a check his fists would have to cash. Down the hall, Rocky's preparation was quieter, more intimate. Mickey wrapped his hands with the same care he had shown for decades, his weathered fingers working with the muscle memory of a man who had prepared fighters for the biggest nights of their lives. Adrian sat nearby, her presence a calming influence in the controlled chaos of pre-fight preparations. "You ready for this, Rock?" Mickey asked as he finished the wrapping. Rocky flexed his fingers, testing the tightness of the tape. "I've been ready my whole life, Mick. Not for this fight, maybe, but for this moment, for the chance to show somebody who counted me out that they were wrong." Paulie, standing in the corner with his usual mix of nervousness and bravado, spoke up. "You know what I think? I think this Tyson guy's been so busy preparing for the fighter he thinks you are. He forgot to prepare for the fighter you actually are." As they made their way toward the arena, Rocky could hear the crowd growing louder, more excited. The sound washed over him like a familiar song, bringing back memories of every big fight he had ever been part of. But this was different. This wasn't just about winning or losing. This was about proving something to himself and to a man who had dismissed him without truly seeing him. The arena was packed beyond capacity, with celebrities and former champions filling the ringside seats. The energy was electric, but there was also something else, a sense that everyone present understood they might be witnessing something special, something that would be talked about for decades to come. When Mike Tyson made his entrance, it was with all the pageantry that had become his trademark. The lights dimmed, the music pounded, and he walked to the ring like a conquering emperor. His robe was custom-made, his entourage was impressive, and his demeanor was that of a man who had never doubted his own supremacy. The crowd roared its approval, feeding off the raw power and confidence he projected. But when Rocky entered, something unexpected happened. The crowd's reaction was different, not louder necessarily, but deeper. There was a quality to the cheers that spoke to something more than entertainment. These people weren't just watching a fighter. They were watching the embodiment of everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough. Everyone who had ever been counted out before they had a chance to prove themselves. The moment of truth arrived with the ring announcements. Michael Buffer's voice boomed through the arena, introducing the fighters with the gravitas that only the biggest fights deserved. When he announced Mike Tyson, the crowd exploded with appreciation for the champion's achievements, his knockout record, his dominance over the heavyweight division. But when Rocky's name was called, something different happened. The cheers were just as loud, but they carried a different quality, not just admiration for accomplishments, but affection for character. This was a crowd that understood they were watching a man who represented something beyond boxing, something about the human spirit's refusal to accept limitations. As the two fighters met in the center of the ring for the referee's instructions, the contrast was striking. Tyson looked like a sculpture carved from granite, every muscle defined, every movement economical and purposeful. His stare was intense, designed to intimidate, to plant seeds of doubt in his opponent's mind before the first punch was thrown. Rocky looked like exactly what Mike Tyson had called him, a simple man, perhaps even ordinary by the standards of elite athletics. But there was something in his eyes that gave even Tyson pause. Not aggression or bravado, but a quiet certainty that suggested he understood something about this moment that others might miss. "I want a clean fight," the referee was saying, but both fighters were focused entirely on each other. "Protect yourselves at all times. Touch gloves if you want to." Tyson extended his glove with mechanical precision, but Rocky's response was different. He looked directly into Tyson's eyes as their gloves touched, and for just a moment, something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or a recognition that what was about to happen would define both their legacies. "Now go back to your corners and come out fighting," the referee concluded. The few seconds between the end of the instructions and the opening bell stretched like hours. In his corner, Mickey gave Rocky final words of encouragement. But they weren't about strategy or technique. They were about heart, about remembering who he was and what he represented. "This is it, Rock," the old trainer said. "Everything you've been through, every time someone said you couldn't do something, every time you proved them wrong, it all comes down to the next 36 minutes. Show him what a simple underdog can do." In the opposite corner, Tyson's team was running through technical reminders, but Mike himself was somewhere else entirely. He was thinking about that moment when their gloves had touched, about the look in Rocky's eyes. There had been no fear there, no intimidation, no recognition of the devastating power Tyson was famous for. There had been only a kind of calm readiness that Tyson had never encountered in an opponent before. The bell rang with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire arena, and 30,000 people held their breath as two fighters, one a devastating champion, the other a simple man from Philadelphia, began to answer questions that had been building for months. Mike Tyson came out exactly as everyone expected, fast, aggressive, looking to end the fight with the kind of early combination that had made him famous. His first few punches were thrown with bad intentions, designed not just to hurt, but to intimidate, to let Rocky know immediately what kind of power he was facing. But something unexpected happened. Rocky didn't react like Tyson's other opponents. He didn't back up or cover up or show any signs of being overwhelmed by the champion's early assault. Instead, he absorbed the punches, moved forward, and began to work his own combinations with a patience and purpose that caught Tyson off guard. By the third round, it became clear that Mike Tyson was facing something he had never encountered in his professional career. An opponent who seemed to get stronger as the fight progressed, who used Tyson's own aggression against him, who turned what should have been a quick demolition into something resembling a war. Rocky's strategy was becoming apparent to those who understood boxing at its deepest levels. He wasn't trying to outbox Tyson or match him punch for punch. Instead, he was doing what he had always done. He was making the fight into a test of will, a question of who wanted it more when everything else was stripped away. Each round followed a similar pattern. Tyson would come out fast, looking to end things with his superior speed and power. But Rocky absorbed the punishment, weathered the storm, and then began to apply his own pressure. By the middle rounds, something remarkable was happening. Mike Tyson, the most feared heavyweight in the world, was beginning to show signs of frustration. "He's not supposed to still be standing," Tyson's corner told him between rounds. "You're winning every round, but you need to put him away." But that was exactly the problem. Rocky wasn't just still standing. He was coming forward, throwing punches, making Tyson work harder than he had worked in years. The champion's conditioning, always excellent, was being tested by an opponent who seemed immune to fatigue, who drew energy from sources that couldn't be measured in training camps or analyzed by computers. In the 8th round, the turning point came. Tyson threw one of his signature combinations, a devastating series of hooks and uppercuts that had ended dozens of fights. Rocky took them all, staggered for a moment, and then did something that sent a shock through the arena. He smiled. It wasn't a smile of arrogance or showboating. It was something deeper, the smile of a man who had found himself exactly where he belonged, facing exactly the challenge he'd been preparing for his entire life. It was the smile of someone who understood that this moment, this test, was what everything had been leading toward. That smile broke something in Mike Tyson's confidence. For the first time in his professional career, he realized he might be fighting someone he couldn't break, someone who operated by different rules than every other opponent he had faced. "This ain't right," Tyson muttered to himself as they clinched. "You should be down. You should be out." Rocky looked him in the eye, still smiling. "But I ain't," he said simply, "and I ain't gonna be." The crowd was on its feet now, sensing that they were witnessing something historic. This wasn't just a fight, it was a demonstration of two completely different approaches to combat, to life, to the fundamental question of what happens when an unstoppable force meets an unmovable object. By the 10th round, the momentum had completely shifted. Tyson was still technically winning most of the exchanges, but he was expending enormous amounts of energy trying to finish a man who refused to be finished. Rocky, meanwhile, was doing what he had always done. He was grinding forward, making the fight ugly, turning it into exactly the kind of battle that favored his strengths over Tyson's. "You can't keep taking shots like this," Mickey told Rocky between rounds, genuine concern in his voice. "I ain't taking them, Mick," Rocky replied, breathing hard but steady. "I'm using them. Every punch he throws makes him more frustrated. Every round that goes by, he believes a little less in what he thought he knew about me." The final rounds became something transcendent, something that went beyond boxing into the realm of pure human drama. Mike Tyson, the most feared heavyweight champion in history, was discovering what Apollo Creed and Clubber Lang and Ivan Drago had learned before him. That fighting Rocky Balboa wasn't just about boxing skill or physical power. It was about confronting the limits of your own will, your own ability to continue when continuation seemed impossible. In the 12th round, Tyson threw everything he had left. His combinations were still technically perfect, still carried the power that had made him a legend. But there was desperation behind them now, the frantic energy of a man who realized his opponent was operating by rules he didn't understand. Rocky took the punishment and kept coming forward. His face was marked, his body had absorbed more punishment than most fighters could survive, but his eyes remained clear and his purpose remained focused. He wasn't just fighting Mike Tyson anymore. He was fighting for every person who had ever been dismissed, every dreamer who had been told their dreams were too simple, every underdog who had been counted out before the fight began. The crowd was in complete chaos now, understanding they were witnessing something that would be talked about for generations. This wasn't just an upset in the making, it was a fundamental shift in what people believed about strength, about heart, about the power of refusing to accept other people's limitations. In the final minute of the fight, something remarkable happened. Mike Tyson, exhausted and frustrated, threw one more desperate combination. Rocky absorbed it as he had absorbed everything else, and then stepped forward into a clinch. For a moment, the two fighters were face to face, breathing hard, looking into each other's eyes. "You were right," Tyson said quietly, so only Rocky could hear. "I didn't know you. I didn't see you." Rocky nodded, not in victory but in understanding. "Sometimes that's all we need," he replied, "just to be seen." Udi, the final bell rang, and 30,000 people erupted in the kind of ovation usually reserved for transcendent moments in human history. The decision was close, closer than anyone had predicted, but that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was what everyone in that arena had witnessed. The power of refusing to accept other people's definitions of who you are and what you're capable of. In the post-fight interview, Mike Tyson was asked about his prediction that Rocky was just a simple underdog. "I was wrong," he said simply. "He is simple, But simple isn't weak. Simple is knowing who you are and being willing to be that person even when the whole world is watching. I thought I was fighting someone beneath me. Turns out I was fighting someone who taught me what it really means to be a champion. Rocky. Mike's a great champion, Rocky said to the interviewer. He's got everything, speed, power, technique. But tonight wasn't about those things. Tonight was about heart, about refusing to quit when quitting would be easier, about showing up as exactly who you are, even when who you are doesn't look like what people expect. As the arena began to empty, two fighters, who had entered as strangers, left with a mutual respect that only comes from having tested each other at the deepest possible level. Mike Tyson had learned that true strength sometimes comes in forms that can't be measured or quantified. Rocky Balboa had proven, once again, that the most dangerous opponent is the one who has nothing to lose and refuses to accept defeat. The simple underdog from Philadelphia had done what simple underdogs do. He had taken everything the world could throw at him and kept standing. He had absorbed the punishment, weathered the storm, and emerged not just victorious, but validated in his belief that sometimes the most ordinary people are capable of the most extraordinary things. In the end, Mike Tyson's words proved prophetic in a way he never intended. Rocky Balboa was indeed just a simple underdog, but as the entire world had witnessed that night, sometimes being simple is the most powerful thing you can be. Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage of all. And sometimes the quietest voice in the room carries the most important message of all. This story isn't just about boxing. It's about every time you've been overlooked, every moment when someone judged your potential by your appearance, every situation where being underestimated became your secret weapon. Rocky Balboa showed us that simplicity isn't stupidity, that heart can triumph over technique, and that the most dangerous opponent is the one who has absolutely nothing to lose. What's your simple underdog moment? Tell us in the comments about a time when someone underestimated you and lived to regret it. Drop A if this story reminded you that being different isn't being less than, it's being exactly who you're meant to be. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own power to surprise the world, hit that subscribe button. Because the best stories aren't about the people everyone expects to win. They're about the ones who win anyway, against all odds, with nothing but heart and the refusal to stay down. Remember, in a world that wants to put you in a box, be like Rocky Balboa. Be simple, be underestimated, and when your moment comes, show them what they missed. The quiet ones, the simple ones, the underdogs. We're not just part of the story. Sometimes we are the story.